Alright, so making a video on my iPhone here. I just got my Android was freaking out, so I went down to just get the cheapest possible replacement, and the iPhone was the cheapest possible replacement. iPhone 4, $50 with the discount, and no rebate, no mail-in rebate. I hate those. Let's see if it works. I might start taking videos outside again, if it works. Okay, this is a video to Barklord. Now, I do think Barklord, I'm sorry, I watched a little bit of my video again, and I'm sorry if me saying that I think you're incorrect or whatever, that's just, I don't mind when people say that to me, so I hope you don't take offense to that when you go, I don't really think you got what I was saying. No, to me, you are, it's obvious again in this video, you have this science and technology go together kind of thing, and I think you're stretching a bit to relate science into this idea of technology. I mean, the art of manipulation, that goes back to mammal times. You're going to call that science, then you're talking all knowledge is science, which makes even it more ridiculous that science is somehow limiting, self-limiting in certain areas. Science as we understand it, yeah, it has limits. Like it's very bad at looking into consciousness, questions of consciousness. But there are Hameroff and Penrose at the very least and other people that are approaching this problem scientifically. It can be done. So, and the idea of slavery, that was a real stretch, that slavery had something to do with science. No. There's many cultures without slavery. The Pacific Indians, for example, Miwok and stuff, I don't believe they had anything quite like slavery. It's not something you need when you have village, community size, what am I trying to say, village size communities. It seems to me that slavery as we understand it, and of course you can always find analogs, oppression, somebody forcing somebody to work for them, but this institutionalized thing we call slavery, that seems to have come from the city-states, from these camps of people where some of the men were entrepreneurs, where rape and pillage was the entrepreneuring model. And that is not from science. The technology you're talking about is more weapons technology. And again, that would seem to go back quite far, much further than what hopefully we're calling science. Now, science is a natural philosophy. And, it's not skeptical in all of its history, but it sort of has come together on a skeptical foundation because skepticism, literally Pyrrhonism and academic skepticism, ideas of skepticism, were adopted basically as the, what do you call it, lingua franca? Might have mispronounced that or got it wrong, but, it's a language that all the natural philosophers could use. Some could, and this goes back to the pre-Socratics, as and so you could have one person believing, fire is the main substance of the universe, and another one that thinks that it's water. Over time, this natural philosophy, these two schools could discuss things with each other through skeptical epistemology, not because they believed only in skeptical epistemology, they believed in more. Many scientists, of course, are very much sure, I know the theory, and that kind of obsession keeps them going. Fine, that's all well and good. But to communicate with other people that had other obsessions, other interests, and perhaps dogmas, or at least different beliefs, it was possible to discuss things in a skeptical epistemology, because the skeptical epistemology is about assenting to what is apparent. So it gives you a chance to prove with evidence and appearances, and everybody just has to agree to be willing to always look at relevant evidence. So it's become a skeptical force now. Up until the Standard Model and relativism, a lot of natural, a lot of physics was of the sort of, tell me where everything is and I can tell you the future and all of this kind of certainty and determinability. But even then, they had already were using, error analysis, plus or minus thresholds of how accurate their measurements were to be considered. How carefully, indications of how carefully they thought they had taken measurements. right? And this was already the seed of a skeptical philosophy. It's just that they thought they were doing that because of the imperfections of their instruments only, and that in principle you could get it exactly. Well, now we've learned that it's not just imperfections in instruments, but much, much more fundamental issues that also ensure you always need, plus or minus, you need statistics. Basically, a modern skeptical epistemology leads to truth through statistics. So we all know how dangerous that is. That's why the skeptic is fond of saying, well, there's not real truth, the kind you used to think there was, because there's just truth from statistics, which can also be made to lie. So what you need to do is be very careful about the statements you make. Right? The repeatability of nuclear weapons is an engineering and actually just a wasteful government spending thing. Scientists don't want to spend more money just to blow. They're not learning. The science of nuclear science isn't learning very much by blowing those weapons up, thousands of weapons, not even for a reason. I think a fundamental thing just about my attitude could be shown with that. You mentioned Edison. A lot of the science Edison would use, like vacuum tubes, have been around, half a century, and those phenomena. I mean, Edison was an engineer. He's a perfect example. Somebody learned some science but is not a scientist. So, that electrocuting animals, that was a marketing thing, dude. That was not science. He didn't do that for research. DC current is more dangerous. The research, and it was going on at the time, showed, and we know DC, if anything, is more dangerous. He was doing that for marketing, and it was a lie. It was very unscientific, and it was disgusting. Edison was disgusting. But you mentioned Feyerabend. I just want to mention, I don't know if you've ever seen, I had a class from Feyerabend, I think it was Ancient Philosophy, and it was lovely. I had him to myself after class. I talked to him. A few students would ask questions they really need to ask, and he'd walk back, and he had a cane. He walked very slowly, and I mentioned before because he wasn't allowed to grade the class. And his books I've never been that into, but he was a very, very interesting person, and I do agree with him in principle. It's just that, I'm not an anarchist because you can't give structure to things. But I am pro-science, and for example, you're talking about magic. I don't know that much recently. I don't know that much about magic, but to me it sounds like meditation. Meditation works. It doesn't mean the reason you think it works is true, right? And, I thought Feng Shui, I like Feng Shui, and again, it works. It's a beautiful way to arrange, a space. But it doesn't necessarily work for the reason they say, and yet it's still a good reason in that the metaphor of Qi is it's like energy, it's and thought. It's a good metaphor for how humans interact with the world because that's how humans think. It's a metaphor for how humans think. Is this stuff really out there in the material world? It's in our interpretation of it. So I look for always to take the grains of truth in such things, if you were to experiment in them and work, back into science. And where you stop, is as soon as possible. You assume as little as you need to in order to go forward. And you don't assume too much about why something works necessarily. You keep an open mind. And that's how science can go into any subject matter. All right, cheers.